Hi everyone, welcome. These two ANC bins that you see right here, they're now 13 weeks of age, that's 91 days of age, and it's been 12 days since they were fed, so I'm sure that they're due for feeding, and so am I. I put some food out on the counter upstairs in the kitchen, and I told myself I don't get to eat until I fed these guys first, so let's get these guys taken care of, and then I get to have some dinner. So let's get to work. The stuff they're getting is a fairly routine assortment of kitchen scraps, different types of veggies and fruits, as well as a little bit of unconventional stuff. I've, in the past, tried feeding worm bins cheese, and I have a couple slices of Munster here that don't look too good, especially that one. You could see some mold growing on it. Not to say there's anything wrong with mold. I know penicillin's made out of mold, and I know worms love mold. But I just figured I would share, let the worms have those couple slices of cheese. So I looked at the video really quickly just to see what types of foods they got last time. I didn't listen to what was there, I just scrubbed through the video footage really quick, and it looked like the stuff that was put in here last time was the sort of stuff that would go pretty quick. It was basically, I think, just some leaves of some beets maybe. And I do remember seeing in the video that there was also a good bit of leftover corn cob that we collected up and put back down into the feeding area prior to putting in those frozen leaves. And those frozen leaves, I doubt after 12 days are going to show any signs of leftovers. Here's a little bit of mold growing. And it seems to be growing on a piece of pumpkin stem. So these two systems each got a chunk of pumpkin stem. This is the piece of pumpkin stem that's at the base of the vegetable, and there was the other piece of it, the top section, which will be in the other system. I wasn't sure what to expect as far as moisture goes in here. It feels like things are okay, nothing to worry about. It also looks like we were pretty generous on the bedding last time, and I was going to do the same again today. Give them a pretty generous portion of bedding. Here's some of the corn cob leftovers. At one point, very early in the summer season, when corn cobs were just starting to collect in my worm food supply collection, I actually went to the trouble of hacking up some of the corn cob bits into these little discs, thinking that it would help speed the breakdown process by making each piece a little bit smaller. I'm still seeing a good number of leftovers of this stuff. I thought I saw some larger chunks as well. So we'll see what we find. I typically like to try to pick through the leftovers to see how they're coming along. But with corn cobs, you know, it's a fairly slow going process. So I think I'm not seeing any leftovers of the frozen leaves that they got 12 days ago. No surprise. Corn cobs are still in here. That's not a surprise either. Or either. So I thought we would just set them aside really quick, kind of collect them up just so we can get a sense of how many of them there still are in here. And it's basically as many as there were last time. So they're all still here, but they're gradually getting whittled down by the wormies. So I think that the foods that they're going to get this time are going to be pretty quick composting, banana peels and tomato pieces and all kinds of good stuff that the worms should enjoy nibbling on. So I'm really just trying to open up a large enough spot in here so that we can place in a pretty good, generous portion of bedding onto which we'll sprinkle half of that collection of food that I bought down here for them, because then we'll take care of feeding the second bin, and then we'll take care of feeding me after all that's done. Alright, I know it's more about the worms, it's not about me. Gotta get over it, right? Alright. I think we've created a large enough opening here to drop in a nice, generous handful of shredded paper, cardboard, some leaves sprinkled in there too. The leaves I sprinkle in are all extremely small in size. I run them through my screen to make sure I'm only getting the smallest itsy bitsy pieces of leaves. And the idea with that is that the leaf particles, I'm assuming, will kind of make their way in between these pieces of paper and prevent things from clumping up and sticking together. But you know, when I put down bedding like this, I just can't resist. Even though I know I'm putting in some yummy food scraps for them in there, I like putting in some of my worm chow too. So let's give these guys a slice of cheese. I know, unusual food item, but I figured what the heck, let's give it a try rather than just chucking it in the trash. So 1 slice of cheese, 2 banana peels, and I'm going to see about pulling out about half of what is in this little collection to give to these little guys. And we'll save the rest for the other container. Yeah, I think that's a fair split. We'll dump the rest into the other container. But let's get this one put back together so we can return it to the storage shelf over there. And we'll get the other guys out here and feed them as well. Okay, looks pretty good. I just sometimes like to also take a peek at how things in the outskirts of the bin are coming along, since most of my feedings are down the middle. Seems like a good idea to check on the outside too. Things are really nice and crumbly and flowing. It feels like it could possibly use a little bit of extra moisture. I'm sure it wouldn't hurt. But I'd like to think that the foods that we're placing in here, as they thaw, they'll kick off a little bit of moisture, which will boost the moisture content of the bin in general. And that's usually the way I prefer to try to incorporate moisture into my systems, is just through the foods that I feed. I'm not really a big fan of spraying water into my systems. But if the climate control in the house starts to dry out the air in the house and subsequently starts to dry out my bins, then I don't have a real objection to compensating for that. But that's the reason I put plastic coverings out on my systems, to try to let the systems preserve what moisture they've already got on their own without me needing to come in all the time and compensate for evaporation. So I think we're just going to let this ride the way it is. Even though it does seem like it might benefit from a little extra moisture, we're just gonna let it continue the way it is. And I don't know, if it starts to continue to look like it might benefit from a little squirt of moisture, maybe we will give it some, but not today. Today we're just gonna give them their food, give them some bedding, and I even thought about throwing in some grit, and I had it right here, but I didn't put it in, so at this point, it's too late. We must move on. Let's get the other system out here and feed them too. Here we go. Same story here for the most part. These bins are all the same age. Well, these 2 bins at least. 91 days, 13 weeks. I always like it when there's a worm out on the top surface of the newspaper waiting to meet me and greet me. Tells me that the moisture is circulating nicely around the system. And perhaps this system actually has more moisture than the other one. It just has kind of a more damp appearance to it in general. So I think it's fair to expect that we're going to see just more of the same. There we go. Another pumpkin stem. The worms seem to be taking to it. Here and there you could see a worm kind of attempting to burrow down into it. It seems like they are successfully making their way into it gradually. And I doubt that we're going to see any leftovers of the leaves, but maybe I spoke too soon. This looks like it might be just a little bit of leftover leaves. Interesting. It's always like one of those spoke too soon moments, right when I was about to say we're probably not going to see any more leaves in here either. It's right then I start to see a little hint of green. Maybe there was some in the other bin too and I just breezed past it without noticing. You can see there's a good number of worms hanging out down here in the feeding area. It does almost seem to me like this is a little bit more moist too than the other one was. That might also be the reason that the wormies are hanging out down here in the feeding area. Yeah, you know, next time we might add a little bit of moisture, or maybe I'll just come in here with a more moisture-rich food item. Maybe some watermelon or something. I'm not sure I've got watermelon in my food supply. I know I've got cantaloupe melon. I believe that that too would probably bring with it a pretty decent amount of moisture. Yeah, I think my sense from just going through this feeding area is that this bin probably does have a little bit more moisture than the other one had. But just a little bit. Not a really big difference between these two systems, as far as I can tell. Okay. I think we've created a large enough opening down here to drop in today's feeding. I'm always just kind of curious to see if I can round up all the leftovers, and there's a good bit of leftover corn cob, but it's been in here for weeks and weeks, and it'll continue to be in here for weeks and weeks. So even though there's all that food there, I don't assume that the worms are able to make immediate use of it, otherwise it'd be gone already, you know. It's just going to sit there, and the worms are going to be hungry. No, I don't think they'll be hungry. Especially these types of worms, these African night crawlers really do seem to thrive on eating a more carbon heavy type food stuff, just like the bedding that they normally get, like leaves or paper or whatever the case may be. So I don't think we would have to worry too much about these worms as long as they've got an ample amount of bedding, and in this system they certainly seem to have just that. But whatever. 12 days to me seemed like a good interval to come back in here and give these little guys their next feeding. So in it goes. Pretty much more of the same like we saw in the other container. It does seem to me like the portion is about the same too. We did a pretty good job dividing it up between the two worm bins, but you know, forgot to put in the worm chow onto the bedding. It's just the way I like to apply it sometimes, but here we're just going to sprinkle it right on top of it. Oops, the kitchen scraps that they're getting. All right, very good, very good. Once again, we're just going to take a moment to see how things in the outskirts of the system are doing. Everything seems to flow quite nicely. And I think that's the result of using a good amount of bedding all the time in all my systems. I've tried really diligently to be very generous on bedding everywhere in all my systems, and it does seem like all my worm bins seem to like it a lot. So I'm not sure why it took me so long to get on the generosity bandwagon when it comes to bedding. I was always kind of skimpy when it came to bedding, but now that I've got a really nice shredder that does a great job hacking up paper, cardboard, whatever I give it, perhaps that's the reason I'm that much more gung-ho about being really generous with bedding. Yeah, everything looks really good in here. Perhaps down in the feeding area, maybe there was a little bit more moisture than what we saw in the other bin, but hardly even worth trying to make an adjustment or compensating for. I would have to say that these two bins are humming along almost identically to each other. Not a lot of differences at all. All right. That was a fun little check-in. Both of these systems seem to be doing quite nicely. Oh, looks like we even have a little feeding zone indicator here that came along for the ride with these top coverings. I didn't really look that closely, but I'll assume that the other system had one too. And at some point, all this stuff will get nibbled away if you don't do anything. If you were to just leave this thing covered with plastic and come back in, say, 2 or 3 months, I'm sure this top covering would be history. I'm sure very little bedding would remain. But I'll never wait that long between feedings. I always like to check in, make sure things are working well in my bins, and keep myself abreast of how they're progressing over time. Not to mention all the stuff in my kitchen would start piling up as far as kitchen scraps to be fed to the worms. Alright everyone, that's it for today's check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. It's always very much appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated too. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.